Hey, what's going on YouTube? Alabama Reloader here. So today's video going to be looking at a couple of different powders, and I've used these before in 6.5 Creedmoor. That's the cartridge we're worried about. But I've never really done extensive testing with either of these powders. And so today we're going to circle back and try them out, see if we can develop a hunting load for either one. And those two powders are IMR 4451, which we're looking at the Sierra manual right here. So IMR 4451, and then also Accurate 2700. I've tested both of these in the past, but it was with a different setup. I had a Savage 110 Tactical in 6.5 Creedmoor. You guys can go back and watch a lot of those videos on that particular rifle. That's still probably one of my favorite rifles that I've owned, and it was certainly one of the most accurate off-the-shelf factory rifles I've ever owned. And it was just, it shot really well in a lot of different bullet powder combinations. It shot really well. But I want to circle back to this powder, looking at a couple of different, data sources to work up the loads, plus what I've sort of used in the past, what I've tested in the past. I want to develop a load for the Kimber, the 84M Hunter that I have now in 6.5 Creedmoor. So that's what we're going to be working with. It'll be Lapua, or Lapua, small rifle primer and undersized flash hole brass. That's what I've been shooting for a long time. Just picked up another box of it. My buddy Daniel, he ended up coming across a pretty good deal. I believe it was Shields was running a pretty good sale on that stuff. It's like 80 bucks for a box of 100, and typically it's not that cheap. I believe it was close to Black Friday or something like that. They were running a sale. So he hit me up, said, hey, I'm looking at buying this stuff. And I was like, oh, that's the exact same brass I've been using forever. And I have, I don't know how many firings on this batch of brass. I was like, so if you order some, go ahead and pick me up another box, because I've had great success with it. So that's what I got now. I'll probably transition to that stuff at some point in time, but we'll keep using what I've been using. And so I want to consider a couple of different sources though, because for IMR 4451, it's not, neither one is really a high velocity option in the 6.5 Creedmoor. For the Sierra data, I will be using 140 grain bullets, but they're going to be the Hornady interlock. So this is not apples to apples by any means, because their shortest overall length is 2.750. In the Hornady manual, they show loading that interlock to 2.680. So 70 thousandths shorter than Sierra's shortest, right? So you can't necessarily just look at it and go, oh, well, this data is for 140 grain bullets, so let me just work up to 42.9 and I should be perfectly fine. Well, that's not the case, because with the interlock, we're definitely going to be seating it slightly shorter. Now, probably not going to be seating it to the 2.680 that Hornady recommends, just because it has a cantilever, and so what I try to do is basically seat the bullet to where the bottom of the cantilever is right at the case mouth. And so that way, that's basically, to me, that's my starting point, because I can only go shorter from there. So it really kind of narrows down your window, if you will, of overall length that you could test, if you want to stay within the cantilever. That's definitely not, you don't have to. It's going to look a little weird if the cantilever is up above the case mouth, and then you've still got some exposed bullet underneath it. If you load it a little bit longer, it's just kind of looks weird, but whatever, to each his own. So that's kind of in my mind how I start with if a bullet has a cantilever, right? Obviously I want to measure my jam point with that bullet, just to make sure I have, I'm not jamming into the rifling, even loading a little bit longer like I am doing, which it's never been an issue for me, but obviously you need to check for yourself in your own setup. But I do want to kind of gather some data from multiple sources. And so the Sierra manual, I just kind of had it laying out. So they go up to 42.9. Hornady goes up to 41.3, so you can kind of see there's a pretty big discrepancy between the Sierra data for 140 grain bullet and the Hornady data for 140 grain bullet. Now the Hornady, you know, they go just like Sierra, you know, they load all the way up to, I think Hornady loads up to 2.8. So they'll go from 2.68 all the way up to 2.8. So pretty wide range there in terms of overall length. But they lump all their bullets together. So they're looking at 41.3 is the max for IMR 4451. I think because we're loading it slightly longer than that, we could probably get away with a little bit more powder, you know, in the case. Probably gonna just go up to 41.5. I think I'll just call it good there, probably 41.5 and be done. I thought about maybe going up to 42 because that's what I'm gonna go up to in the accurate 2700 testing. And the reason I want to do that is because I actually have that previous data from when I had my Savage 110 Tactical. I was testing with the Spear 140 Gold Dot, and on that the overall length was 2.75, and so I won't be loading it quite that long. I think if I do it at the base of the cantilever, I believe I'm somewhere like 2.7. It's like 2.710 or 2.72, so I'm still slightly shorter than this, but I believe I should be good working up to 42 grains, which is what I plan on testing. And you can see in the Savage we got up to 2,700 feet per second. So 140 grain bullet, 6.5 Creedmoor, 2,700 feet per second. That's not bad, right? That's moving along halfway decent. That's what the velocity looked like back then. So gonna give it a go in the timber and see what we come up with. Now Hornady does not have data for accurate 2700, so that's why I've got to pull it from pulled it from the Hodgdon website. And of course they don't have the Hornady 140 interlock. They've got a couple of other bullets like the 140 AMAX and I think the 140 Swift. I think there's a 140 Swift listing in there. So yeah, we're gonna roll with 42, working up to that. You know, same thing on this. We'll probably work up to 41.5 for 4451. Obviously, if we're running into pressure, we'll just kind of cut it short. But that's the plan. So let's go dump some powder. All right, so over here throwing some powder charges. This is the RCBS Chargemaster Lite, and big fan of it. It works really well. I've had no issues with it. But I've already got the IMR 4451 charges dumped and bullets seated. So that's already done. And I wanted to kind of just show you guys what I was talking about. I'll just grab one of these. Not sure, you might be able to tell that is well, it's really hard to see. The shiny part right there, that's actually the brass. Trying to show, I mean, the cantilever, there's just ever so slightly a little bit of bullet exposed below the cantilever right at the mouth of the case. These are loaded to 2.7 inches, so 2.700. And like I was saying, the Hornady manual calls for 2.68 0-inch cartridge overall length with this 140 grain interlock. So what that means, and the reason, again, I'll just reiterate why I seat them at the base of the cantilever, because that is as long as I'm going to load them ever, right? I'm not going to load them a little bit longer and have a lot of the bullet exposed below the cantilever. It just looks weird. It's just, yeah, it just looks weird. So if I'm going to do that, I might as well go shoot something else. Go grab like a Spear 140 hot core and shoot that. So it doesn't have a cantilever. So yeah, so that basically sets my limit, if you want to think of it that way. That is as long as I'm going to load this particular bullet in this cartridge, 6.5 Creedmoor. So knowing that, having that in the back of my mind, I can go, okay, well, there's 20 thousandths difference between what I loaded it to, my limit, right, my maximum overall length that I'm going to load it to, and what the manual calls for. So there's really not a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of seating depth testing that you can do to explore that range. Now you could go a little bit shorter than the manual. If you really wanted to, wouldn't advise that at all. I would stick to the manual as the sort of the starting point, the low point, as short as you would want to go. So there's only 20 thousandths difference. So that's for those people that want to do like seating depth test and that type of thing, and you want to get into that. And because that's the thing, when you have a bullet that doesn't have a cantilever, right, and you find your jam point, and you go, okay, well, I'm gonna work up to 20 thousandths off of my jam point. Well, your cartridge overall length might be like 2.75, but your jam point might be, you know, 2.85, right, 100 thousandths. Well, now you go, okay, well, how large should my increments be for my bullet jump test, my seating, or my seating depth testing? You know, well, you got to shoot quite a bit to cover a decent amount of ground, even if you're jumping 10 thousandths, right, per test group. I mean, you gotta load up quite a bit of ammo. So when it comes to something like this, like the interlock line of bullets that have a cantilever, like the Grand Slams from Spear, I believe they have a cantilever as well. Several bullets do, the SSTs from Hornady. So when you come up on something like that, you can kind of just think of it like, okay, this is my limit. This is as long as I can load it. Now I can just load it a little bit shorter. You can do 5 thousandths jumps, right? 5,000 increment jumps for your seating depth test, and you cover 20 thou in 4, right? So that's the thing. You can make them even tighter than that if you wanted to. And really, I think Eric Cortina, I believe he recommended 3 thousandths, I think, in some of his videos. Don't know if he still recommends that, probably. But yeah, so that's what I was talking about. That's at 2.7. So now that's as long as it'll be from here. If any of this stuff shoots good, hopefully all of it does. But if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. I can go back. I can seat these a little bit shorter. I can do some seating depth. I can mess around with that if I want to. Really, this is just more so to see how this stuff, IMR 4451 and Accurate 2700, perform with this bullet in my Kimber, right? That's really, at the end of the day, what it's all about. That's what I care about. It just needs to be good enough to go hunt with, and shot distance is probably gonna be 200 yards in. So, all right, let's see, that charge weight is done. All right. And you can set this up to run in auto mode, but I'm only throwing 3 charges per three per test charge. So, you know, I'm not going to constantly go in auto and then manual mode. But whenever I load it, like when I found that really good load for the Spear, the 140 Impact with Alliant Power Pro 4000 MR, and I loaded up, I think 50 of those. Yeah, of course I'm going to run it in auto mode. That just makes the most sense. But with this, I'm just going to keep pressing the button. No big deal. So I'll get these loaded up. And so also one thing to mention, IMR 4451 is it's a stick powder. It's more on the shorter side in terms of length of the kernels of powder. And then Accurate 2700 is a spherical powder. It's not a ball powder, not a true ball powder. Some people use those interchangeably. The ball powders, typically, they are literally just tiny little balls of powder. This is more of a flattened ball, spherical powder. So I doubt I can get this to focus. Yeah, no, there's no way. This ain't happening. I can't. There's just, yeah, it's not gonna focus enough to where you can see, like, it's more of just a flattened ball. So there's that. And since my die is already set up for the bullet seating, this will go super easy. I'll get these charges dumped, get them seated. Let's head to the range. All right, so back at the house, and finally got all this stuff shot, and this target is a bit of a mess. I'll give you that. But look at some of this stuff down here. Ooh, really nice. Up here, not so much. But the top row here, these top 5, and my dots are not exactly, you know, parallel and all that stuff. They're not exactly in a straight line. They do kind of go slope downward slightly. That's what happens when you're trying to put these on freehand. Top row, IMR 4451. The second row is accurate 2700. And so you can see nothing really to write home about group wise. Again, only 3-shot groups, so it's a little difficult to at least judge velocity. Obviously you can get some idea, indication is what I like to call it, of the accuracy potential even with just 3 shots, because if it groups like that, chances are that's not a good load. Don't fool with it, don't mess with it. And so yeah, you can still, I know a lot of people say 3-shot groups are irrelevant, but keep in mind this is with a Kimber 84M Hunter, which is I think a 5.5 pound rifle, I believe, maybe slightly less than that. And it has an extremely thin barrel profile. So if I were to try to do 5, 10, 15, 20 shot groups, I'd be waiting forever to get all these shots. So it's just not how we're gonna roll. This is, of course, with the 140 grain, the Hornady Interlock 140 grain bullet. Cartridge overall length is 2.7. I think in the manual, I believe it says like 2.69 or something along those lines. But I've got it seated at 2.7. And again, nothing really to write home about. There's really no point in measuring any of these. I did make a scope adjustment down and to the right after these first 2 groups because they were hitting so high, you know, above the dots. I didn't want them possibly going up into the other dots there, so I did adjust downward and then shot the last 3 groups. So on the velocity side of the house, you know, with IMR 4451, we were a little bit on the slower side. We started off, we were at 2560 was the average for the first group, and there's all the information, right? And then we ended at 2645, that group down there. And then the SDs are out beside it. For the accurate 2700, which it is a better velocity option in the Creedmoor, we started at 2649 here, and we ended at 2681. So again, there's the data, right? There's the charge weights and the SD numbers to go along with them. So there you go. Not really much, you know, I want to continue with here. I mean, I've got 20 more pieces of brass that have already been processed. I've already got them primed. So I actually am going to load up, I'll probably just load up 20 pieces of, or I'll load up those 20 pieces with, you know, maybe that 41.4 grain charge right there with accurate 2700, and just see how that does. I mean, that's like 2675, 26, yeah, somewhere in that range. Yeah, and just kind of see how it shoots, and if it groups, you know, even 1.5 inches, right? If I should go back, and since I've got 20 of them loaded up, if I go and shoot a couple of 5-shot groups and you're talking 1.5 inches, I'll probably be perfectly fine with that because I want to test it out in the woods. So that'll get the job done on some deer. But yeah, that's really it. Nothing too exciting, nothing really to, you know, blow my hair back here, but that's it. I'm not even gonna measure them, no point. So we'll just call it done there. I mean, would have liked, obviously, for much better accuracy or precision out of these guys, out of both of these powders. Would have been nice, but oh well. Your rifle might really like it, I don't know. Different bullet, probably a different story. So that's where we're gonna leave it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll catch you next time. Y'all have a good one.